I can't hear Ethan. You've muted yourself. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the pickup line. Happy
Can you hear me
Thursday.
now?
Yeah, we can hear
What is
you.
going on? What was with that? That froze.
I don't know, but you're fine now, and I'm
Okay.
happy to see you.
Welcome back to the pickup line. I'm your host, Ethan, and alongside me, as always, is Miss Hannah Vaughn. Hannah, how's it going?
It's going good. How are you holding up?
I'm a little meh. Like,
Um,
full transparency. I was kind of about doing the show, but I can't just sit around and mope.
yeah. We
Like
lost a
I've been
real
doing.
one, guys.
For those that don't know, my kitty, who is only 6, I had to put Band-Aid to sleep. It's definitely not been an easy ride, that's for sure. I know my girlfriend's constantly seen me bawling like a baby. I've just been a total wreck.
It's understandable.
And
I'm gonna
then,
miss the tails going across the screen, but you know what? This
oh,
one's for you, Band-Aid. I'm sorry, don't cry.
my nephew saw me crying before the show
Oh.
because I just opened the ashes and everything, and he drew me Band-Aid playing with some.
Oh, your nephew drew that?
Didn't draw it by myself. I had a machine that I can draw.
Oh, well, I thought you drew it because it looks pretty good.
Machine that can draw. I'm impressed either way. Very
Yeah,
cool.
it looks pretty good.
Well, we will always remember Band-Aid. He was legendary, and he will be missed dearly.
The Atheist kitty streamer.
My favorite co-host. Sorry, Ethan. Well,
man, it's not easy. But anyways, we're not here to talk about Band-Aid. We're here to talk about STDs with SDB.
woohoo.
So, should we bring on our guest host for the evening?
We sure should.
Well, everyone is familiar with him because he's been going on every show on the planet, Transatlantic Call-In Show, The Line, Talk Heathen. He's absolutely blowing up. So I would like to welcome none other than student Dr. Ben, SDB. How you doing?
What's up?
Not
It's a
much
little echoey.
Yes, it is echoey right when you came on.
And then
okay.
when we fix the echo, I want you to plug, well, it's in the chat, but plug your channel and where people can find you.
Yeah, so I have a channel, Student Dr. Ben. I'm on YouTube and I'm on Twitch, although they're kind of separate channels for me. My YouTube is all of my science-y, nerdy content. So I have a live show on Saturdays at 2 p.m. Eastern time called Medical Myths. This week, I don't have a guest because I wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of the adrenal gland and the myth of adrenal fatigue. So if you want a lecture on endocrinology, I'm doing that this week. I also do trivia nights on Twitch. So Twitch is where I do all my hangouts. We have trivia nights Fridays at 9 p.m. Eastern time. And then I don't think I'm on any other shows in the near future because I'm studying like all the time. But that's where you can find me.
I wish I could just borrow your brain. You are just filled with so much knowledge.
Oh, you don't want it.
Yes,
you don't want it.
I wish I knew half of
want
what you knew.
Yeah. Well, we're going to borrow your brain today and talk about some fun stuff. Talk about STDs.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say it's
Do we
fun.
call them STIs or STDs or both? Like,
Yeah,
what are
what's
you?
the difference?
They're both the same thing.
Okay, but I was told that like, we no longer call them STDs. Is that true? Or
I
is
mean,
it some
more people call them STIs now, but like, I mean, colloquially, there might be a difference, like with how society views it, but scientifically speaking, and no one really cares.
really matter? Okay, well, interesting. Cool. So student Dr. Ben has a quiz for me and Ethan to kind of test our knowledge kind of as a starting point before we kind of get into a bunch of questions we probably all have, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of misinformation, depending on, you know, what kind of sex ed you grew up with. I grew up with starting with abstinent only in like middle school, and then in high school it was totally different. It was actually pretty informative, and then I took a bunch of like sex classes in college, and I'm very grateful for that. So I hope I'll do well.
I had a very poor sex education, except for the fact my aunt became a doctor, and she told me all the horror stories of STDs. So that is the one area where I think I have a little bit of knowledge. Obviously not comparable to STB over here, but I'm curious to see how I'll do on this test and if that knowledge I have from, you know, how many years ago still holds up.
Are we taking callers today?
Yeah. So if you have any questions on STDs, STIs, give us a call, 951-364-2430, or tag YFNA and put it in the chat, and we're happy to ask student Dr. Ben. Now is the time, because we do have a medical professional on the show for you to get answers to all those things you've been wondering. And of course, you don't have to use a real name. If you want to use a pseudonym when you come on, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
I do want to say real quick, of course, I have to say I'm not your doctor, so secular Rarity, do not call in with your rash questions, because I don't want to hear it. I know
I was going to say, if you're going to ask for a diagnosis, secular Rarity, our lovely call screener, will get your insurance information. I'm kidding. But anyway, should we do the quiz?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Great. So they are all multiple choice. And if you are in the audience and want to put what you think the answer is, go for it. So I'll start with some of the easier questions first.
Okay.
Start with this. I think this one's the easiest, probably. So these are kind of scenario-based questions. So it's like I'm giving you kind of what this person, like you're playing doctor for a second. This person's coming to you. They have an STI. You got to figure out what it is. So you have.
Wait, I get to be Dr. House right now and say differential diagnosis.
Yeah, well, we're not doing the whole process, because I made these very simplified. But yeah, you can have fun with it.
Okay.
So your first one is a 40-year-old male, and he's presenting with, and I will explain this if I need to, what this would look like. So imagine multiple, very painful, grouped, small, shallow vesicles on a red base. So imagine like, hard to explain. Very small.
You're painting a good picture.
If you can imagine what that looks like on his penis. He has had these before a few years ago when he was sexually active, but they went away on their own, and he is now not currently sexually active.
Do they itch? Do they burn?
Yeah. They kind of itch, and they're painful. They are painful. And you can tell that they're very small, and they have fluid in them.
Pregnant.
Yes, definitely pregnant. So which of these organisms most likely caused it? Your options are A is HPV, which is human papillomavirus. Option B.
Until the end, Ethan.
Okay, sorry.
Option B is herpes. Option C is syphilis. Option D is Haemophilus ducreyi.
I have never heard of Haemophilus, so
we'll talk about that.
I've never heard of that. So I'm leaning towards. I didn't know herpes itched, so I was leaning towards herpes. But you said multiple, correct?
Yeah, they're kind of grouped all in one spot, though.
I don't think that's herpes.
All small ones.
I'm gonna say herpes because you said this would be an easier one, and I don't think you're trying to trick us yet. And it's either HPV.
But doesn't syphilis cause that too? All right, I'm gonna go with syphilis.
This one is herpes.
Oh,
so good, Ethan.
I'll explain the differences as we go on.
That's what I said. Okay.
The next one.
So herpes, it can be more than one sore, is what you're saying.
It's usually multiple. It's a group of multiple small sores in kind of one spot. And the reason why they do that is because when they're latent, they will essentially hibernate in the dorsal root ganglion of the nervous system. So it travels on your nerve back to almost near your spinal cord. There's a ganglion there where your sensory nerves pass through. It's going to be dormant there. And then when it's ready to be activated again, it'll travel back through the dorsal root ganglion, through the peripheral nerve to kind of the same spot.
Oh, wow.
The same thing you get with shingles, because that travels along a dermatomal pattern. So you'll see the same thing there.
Wow.
So herpes always shows up in like the same spot, you're saying?
Well, it usually will. It gets a bit complicated with like the perineal area because they're more like the dermatomes aren't as spaced out as they are in other areas.
Okay.
But yeah, it's common for them to show back up in the same place.
Is it possible to have herpes without having symptoms, student Dr. Ben?
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry,
definitely.
Yes.
Yeah, latent herpes.
Okay.
So that's why in the case he had these before when he was sexually active, they went away on their own. And then he is not sexually active right now, but he is presenting again with the same thing.
I knew the answer. I just wanted to dispel that potential misconception.
No, and this is actually really important for pregnancy because if you've ever had herpes, you need to disclose it, but you also need to be very careful. If you have an active infection, you might not be able to vaginally deliver. You might have to have a cesarean if you're not able to treat it ahead of time.
Ah, okay.
So.
Interesting.
Next question.
So,
did you have
sorry, last follow-up question. So someone can actually have herpes and not have symptoms for a long time or possibly ever?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
wow.
very unpredictable how it comes back.
Oh, okay. Cool. And just for clarity, herpes cannot be cured. It just can
At
be
this
treated
time.
with antivirals.
Yeah, it's not really. I'm like theoretically, but like practically, no.
So can you expand on that? What do you mean by theoretic?
Like theoretically, you could use an antiviral, and if it were to not significantly replicate to where you were able to kill it all with an antiviral, but that's just not realistic. So, usually
so
no.
It's possible that you could permanently kill it?
Theoretically, but not practically. Like it's not something I have evidence for, but theoretically, I think if you caught it at the right time, you could, but it's just not a realistic scenario. So it's like if I were to become the philosophy bro of science and like argue about the exact timing and stuff you'd need to be able to, but that's the weeds. So I don't know if we need to go there.
What
And
if
I
someone
may
took,
go ahead.
Sorry, this is just fascinating to me. What if someone took like an abundance of antivirals? Will that make any difference?
Probably not.
Okay.
I have to get on my soapbox for a second because I love a lot of people who have herpes because a lot of people have herpes, whether they know it or not. Is that wrong?
A lot of people have herpes, and there are multiple types of herpes.
I thought there's two. There's one which is like your mouth, and two which is your vaginal area or your
usually usually they're split up like that. Although you can get HSV1 infections in your genitals, but it's like it's less common. More commonly, it is split up HSV1 and HSV2.
So the soapbox I want to get on because it's something I'm quite passionate about. Herpes is not a death sentence. There are many people who have it and live totally like normal lives and still have sex lives and like just have to have sometimes an uncomfortable conversation with a new sex partner. And you're not going to die. It's going to be okay.
See, this is where I didn't even know there was like that social stigma with herpes. Like, because I mean, I'm coming at it from a purely medical perspective to where I'm like, herpes is like one of the most benign of the STIs. So I was like, if I had to choose one.
It's the butt of so many jokes. Like when I grew up, people were like, oh, this person has hurt. Like they would spread rumors that people have, like it was demonized. And a lot of like my loved ones who are living with this say that the stigma is the worst part. And sometimes the first outbreak, but the stigma is the absolute worst part of it because people treat you like they say it's like a dirty person's disease. And it's like, people can go through all of the precautions and like get their partner tested. Partner doesn't know that they have it, and then something happens, and then all of a sudden they're having like the person they gave it to is having crazy outbreaks, and the person who gave it to them isn't. Like it just happens, and you do your best and try to be responsible. But like it's not a dirty person's disease. It's not a death sentence, and don't make fun of it, please.
I gotta say, so if 2 years ago and prior, or I'll say a year and a half ago and prior, 2 years ago, around there, and prior, if someone told me they had herpes, I would have not touched them in a million years because it was always programmed in my head that it was very bad. It's dirty. Stay away from it. It's gross. You're going to catch it. My position has since evolved since talking to people about it and learning more about it, that it's not, like you said, a death sentence. It's not the end of the world. You can wear protection and be protected against it.
Or have sex when you're not having an outbreak and,
Right.
Yeah, and like it's not curable per se, but with anything in medicine, most things are not curable, but they are manageable.
Right.
You can manage herpes.
Yeah.
And then I know we shouldn't probably spend the whole show on herpes, but we do have a question.
I could though, I swear.
Are herpes the same thing as cold sores? And if
Yes,
they are, correct? Which
they
is
are
not the same as canker sores.
No, canker sores are aphthous ulcers, and that's a whole different pathophysiology.
I
But
get canker sores all the time.
yeah, they're benign, and pretty much everyone gets those, and they don't really mean a whole lot. There are a couple diseases that like relate to canker sores that aren't super important here because they're not. They're more autoimmune. But yeah, cold sores are usually HSV1, and almost everyone has gotten it at some point.
Now, so what is do you know the percentage of the population that has like HSV1 versus HSV2?
I don't have the number off the top of my head, but
isn't it pretty high that for the number of people that have either?
I thought it was like 1 in 4.
I mean, it's high. It's high. And like an HSV1 is one that like, especially, I mean, most people don't get these complications, but it's actually the most common cause in like the United States of encephalopathy. So you can get, if you're going to get a brain infection, it's probably herpes, unless you're immunocompromised. So
wait, herpes can cause a brain infection?
Yeah, encephalitis. If you're going to get encephalitis, it's probably herpes. Herpes 1 specifically.
So does the antivirals prevent what did you call it again? The
encephalitis. You just have to treat it when it happens. It's so rare. Like you'd have to get herpes in your cerebrospinal fluid. Like usually, like it's going to present similarly to a meningitis, like in similar ways that you get meningitis. But it's so rare. It's incredibly rare.
That's good.
All right. So a quick Google search. During 2015-2016, the prevalence of herpes simplex virus type 1, HSV1, was 47.8%.
I thought it was
and the prevalence of herpes simplex virus 2 is 11.9%.
And so a reminder that prevalence,
right?
but a reminder of prevalence that prevalence is the new cases combined with the pre-existing cases. So everyone that has it at that time, whether it be chronic or acute, they're all included in prevalence.
Okay. All right. So moving on to, we should get to the second question because we're 20 minutes in and we only got to one question.
I know. I could talk about that for like ever, but okay, go ahead.
And this might be a great way to go about it, kind of address them as they come, or we can go through them. And okay, so this next one is also kind of an easy one. So we have a 25-year-old female who's presenting just for a routine wellness visit. She's asymptomatic. She's been sexually active since age 17 and is behind on her vaccinations. She had a PAP today that shows irregular cells and coilocytosis consistent with cervical intraepithelial neoplasia 3. Which organism is the most likely cause? And the options are A, chlamydia, B, gonorrhea, C, HPV, or D, HIV.
HPV.
Yep, absolutely.
Hell yeah, we're so good at this.
Which brings me, I do have one more follow-up question on herpes. Is there like a blood test that, like, say something never shows symptoms? Is there a blood test that will show the person has herpes no matter what? Like,
probably not.
Don't you have to be having an outbreak in order to test positive for it?
Yeah, you'd have to isolate the virus.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then HPV. Now, I've heard there are no blood tests for HPV. Is that correct?
No. But correct. That's why you gotta get vaccinated, because we can prevent this with vaccination, and you can get this up to age 45. Just if you're between
25.
They increased it. If you're age 15 through 45, you need 3 doses instead of 2.
So, okay, I am a sexually active person. For those that don't know, I'm in a semi-open relationship. Should I go get the HPV vaccine?
I would highly recommend it. Highly recommend it.
My mom got it for me. Well, she didn't get it for me. She took me to so I could get it. She goes, I got it for you. Okay. Anyway, she took me to get it when I was as soon as I was eligible. And she was like, I'm not gonna assume that you're not having sex. You might have sex at some point. You might be having sex now. None of my business. Either way, you're getting the vaccine. And I was just like, okay. Because I think
it is
a huge uproar in the South. People are like, because I think they tried to make it mandatory, and they're like, my kids aren't having sex, and then it's like, oh, that's funny because the South has like a lot of STDs.
Yeah.
Is there any like painful side effects or like sick side effects of getting the vaccine?
I mean, the same as most other vaccines. Like you might have a sore arm and a fever, but I mean, this is for people who want a cancer vaccine. This is literally a cancer vaccine. Like that's what you're preventing. You're not preventing the disease necessarily. You're preventing the cancer caused by the disease.
So I am going to take your advice and I am going to call my doctor because I thought the age limit was 25 and I'm going to go get that HPV vaccine. So thank you.
Do it. I want to get on a little bit of a soapbox with HPV because it is fascinating. So we're preventing not only cervical cancer, we're also preventing throat cancer and anal and rectal cancer. And it's a fun, well, not a fun, it's a fascinating mechanism of how this happens. Yeah, so HPV has a few enzymes that it produces. There's E6 and E7, and they're involved in cancer because E6 and E7 inhibit tumor suppressor genes. So in order to have cancer, you need to have the ability, number one, to grow indefinitely or grow beyond what normal capabilities are. And you need to suppress regulation of cell division. So you have to be able to grow and you have to shut down any pathways that are going to say, nope, you can't do that. So what it does, there are a few,
because I like the way you explain things. Sorry.
there are a few proteins that go into suppressing tumors. And so both of these that I'm going to talk about are tumor suppressor genes. So they are responsible to shut down cancer pathways. So E6 is going to inhibit something called P53, which suppresses unregulated cell growth. And then E7 is going to actually block RB, which is the retinoblastoma protein, which is related to is named after a totally different cancer. But that RB normally binds something called E2, which is what causes the genes for cell growth and division to be produced. So you need E2 to grow the cells and replicate the DNA so that you can have more and more and more cells. So what happens is RB is supposed to hold on to E2 and say, no, you can't produce more of this stuff. We don't need any more cells. You're done. But E7 from HPV comes in and takes over the spot in RB and says, nope, I'm going to hold on to you so that E2 can run off and do its little thing and replicate over and over again. And then normally you'd also have P53 over here saying, nope, you're messing up over here. I need to shut you down. And then E6 is like, no, I got you too. You can't do your job either. And then you get this unregulated cell growth, and that's how you get cancer.
So it's basically like a bar fight and some friends coming in and holding you back so you can't fight.
Pretty much.
No. I understood some of that.
Same.
I had to make like a bar fight metaphor though.
Yes. Yeah, it's like a bar fight.
We do have a follow-up wait, where did it go? Ian had a question. Oh, Ian says, I live in the UK. Do you know if it is available on the NHS? I'm guessing not because I've never even heard of it. I don't know what NHS is. Do you?
Oh, for that's their National Health Service.
Okay.
I don't know if what brand name it goes by in your country, but it's marketed here as Gardasil, which everyone has a huge problem with because everyone thought that it like killed people and it didn't. That's like the anti-vax movement doing their thing.
Right.
No, Gardasil is safe. It is a safe vaccine. But I don't know what it is in the UK if they use a different brand.
Remember there's a bunch of commercials for Gardasil, and then everyone had to go get it. I don't know. That was my little anecdote.
Should we move on to question 3?
I would like to.
We do have a caller, but they're being screened, so we'll keep going.
Okay. When they're ready, we can always take a pause.
They better behave.
Okay. So, this one, a 23-year-old female presents with complaining of constipation and a whitish rectal discharge, joint pain, and a rash that began 3 days ago. She reports that she had a new male sexual partner who inconsistently uses protection, and she receives both oral and anal intercourse. She is mildly febrile, so she has a slight fever. Genitourinary exam is unremarkable, so that's all normal. Rectal exam, this is kind of gross. There's mucopurulent anal discharge without other abnormalities. And she has a diffuse maculopapular rash on her trunk and extremities. Which of these is the most likely diagnosis? HIV, Treponema pallidum, or syphilis, Neisseria gonorrhea, or cytomegalovirus?
I don't know what the last one is. I'm leaning towards syphilis or gonorrhea.
I'm leaning towards gonorrhea.
I'm gonna go with syphilis.
I'm gonna go with gonorrhea.
This one is gonorrhea.
Oh, damn it, Hannah.
I'm a doctor now.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm kidding.
So let me ask the questions to Hannah. What convinced you that it was gonorrhea?
Because I've had chlamydia and it was mostly asymptomatic, and I know that gonorrhea is the one that makes you feel bad. And because of the anal seepage. And that's like one of my favorite phrases in the world to say. And I was super excited when you're like, this is gross. And you described anal seepage because that's like my favorite phrase in the world. Weird and just
so
weird thing about
gross.
me. It's like the funniest thing to say, anal seepage.
Yeah, so the discharge, because you'll get discharge with both chlamydia and gonorrhea, depending, but they look kind of different.
Yeah.
It's going to be more purulent with gonorrhea, so like that's kind of gross, but more pus filled.
Right.
Is more gonorrhea. Something else, a rash is something especially that should tip everybody off that it's gonorrhea, because other conditions don't usually present with that, especially, and this kind of gives something away for later, but gonorrhea and chlamydia are very easy to misdiagnose as each other, apart from a rash.
And I guess that's why I went with that, because I, like, when I had chlamydia, like, I was like, oh, I've got weird discharge, but like, I didn't really think it was a big deal. And I went into the doctor for like some other reason, and they like called me the same day, like, you need to come back and take a bunch of antibiotics. And I was like, why? I had no idea. Anyway, that's my freaking story of my STD. It wasn't a big deal. People act like the STDs are like, it is a big deal because like you should like treat your body and like be healthy, whatever, and like try to not spread them. But like people act like, oh, it's dirty, and it's like it literally happens to everyone who has sex almost. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
And gonorrhea is one that's a bit more scary, depending. Like one of the more risky things you get with gonorrhea, especially in younger people. Have you heard of septic arthritis?
No, I've heard of septic and arthritis, but not together.
I mean, it's basically, it's arthritis, but it's when you get an infection in a joint space.
Oh my God.
So if you feel like your knee that's swollen, red, very painful, and also if you have a fever, that would tip me off to this might be infectious. And one of the more common causes of septic arthritis in people who are sexually active, and especially young people, is gonorrhea. So you can, get septic arthritis. You can also get osteomyelitis, which is an infection of bone. So you can get a bone infection.
Are they curable though?
Yeah. You treat it like you would with sepsis or it's like the septic arthritis. You're going to treat antibiotics. You're going to drain it and that kind of thing. It's curable. It's not a fun thing. Osteomyelitis, depending on how severe it is, because normally when you think of something like osteoarthritis, you're thinking of like diabetes and foot amputations, because that's something that's really common. If it's bad enough, like if you just let it go and get necrotic, sure. But I mean, if it's not too bad, usually antibiotics can get rid of that too. But it's scary. It's scary and not comfortable. And you might be in the ICU. So
you just gotta not ignore like when stuff's going on with your body.
So
you don't want it to get worse.
This. How often would you recommend somebody get tested who is sexually active with multiple partners but uses protection?
You asking for a friend, Ethan?
I'm asking for
SDB is not your doctor.
Well, that kind of needs to be a more individualized question, I guess, but definitely get tested whenever you get a new partner. And definitely, like, if anything,
every time I have sex with someone else, I should get tested.
It'd be smart every time you have a new partner, because that way you go into it knowing what's going on. But otherwise, like, you don't need to be obsessive about it.
Okay.
Because once you've kind of established that you have something or you don't, and then if you're with that partner and you're using protection, okay, cool. Unless you start getting symptomatic or something changes, you're going to want to get tested. I think it's kind of recommended that like people who are sexually active kind of get tested at their, annual visits. But it's not like something that's going to, like, really the thing that's going to make or break you, I think, is if you are getting new partners or if something changes.
Okay.
We got a really good chat, and I do have a question because I want to settle something. Okay, so Atheist Drew says, my ex gave me gonorrhea. It was oral, and I had no symptoms, but he had anal and had discharge, and I was in a monogamous relationship, but he wasn't, and the STI was how I found out. So that brings me to this question. Can you get chlamydia from fleas?
I don't know the answer to that.
And we're good friends now, so I hope he sees this, because to this day, he claims that he was being faithful, but we were in a monogamous relationship and we both got chlamydia. And he's like, well, my roommate also had chlamydia and we also had fleas in the house. So
I've never heard of that being a mechanism, but I'm open to being wrong if someone could demonstrate that I'm wrong. But I've never heard of that.
I still call him like, say, like, just tell me. Like, it's fine. We're broken up. We're friends now. Like, just tell me.
Right.
Like, and he's like, no, it's the fleas. I have no idea, because I think a flea bit him and the blood and then bit me. And that's how we all got chlamydia.
That
and I'm like,
completely asinine.
I think
I would never
more
believe
realistic.
A doctor was like, yeah, that's true. That sounds asinine.
It's like the more reasonable explanation is probably you cheated because he was a serial cheater. Like, to this day, he like will die on this hill, and like, I need to know someday. If you're watching this, bud, and literally last time we talked about this, I was like, okay, I'm just so you know, I don't believe you, but like, keeps telling your story. Like, it's fine. Like, just so you know, please.
Okay, here's a good question.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Can two people who don't have an STI in a monogamous couple develop an STI without another person involved?
It's not likely.
Maybe with dormant herpes.
No, it would depend on the infection. Because you can get it from a lot of these you can get from just bodily fluids. But also, I mean, this isn't necessarily related to the specific scenario, but you can. I do want to take some time at some point during this show to talk about vertical transmission with pregnancy and how babies get a lot of these conditions and how they can be very problematic. But if you're immunocompromised, you definitely be more at risk to getting it from less than likely sources. So I think for the general population, it's not likely to get it from just, and this whole thing is so weird with the monogamous relationship stuff. And I'm sure Hannah is going to agree with me on a lot of it. But the way doctors approach that conversation is absolutely terrible. Because I think there's the stigma of you're not monogamous, therefore you have an STI. And what do you think about that?
Can you repeat that?
Like when you're
going off into La La Land thinking about my own life. Okay.
Same.
Well, like because I noticed this with my education and how there's still a lot of stigma within medicine on a lot of things, and a couple of them being polyamorous people and sex workers. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stigma with having multiple partners, and the idea that it's assumed that if you have more than one partner, that you just automatically jump to an STI and you kind of skip over the rest of the thought process. Like, how damaging is that to the community?
Yeah, I agree. I've been lucky enough with like my doctors when I've been in like not monogamous relationships where I've just told them point blank, like, I have multiple partners and I'm getting a checkup for this or whatever. I don't know. I think I've gotten pretty lucky, but yeah, like I think the whole attitude towards STDs is generally damaging and makes people scared of getting treatment, scared of addressing their symptoms. Because people will be like, oh, I have this, but it's probably nothing because they're like it's too shameful to even like go to a doctor sometimes. Mm. I hope that answers your question. I don't know. Was I totally missing the mark on that?
Yeah, no, you're good. Just like I was just addressing a social point that a lot of med students especially miss because we're too far into the physiology and forget that, people are people, and the stigma can be perpetuated by people in our position. Like, people remember what you tell them, and if we treat STIs and people who have multiple partners as if like you're automatically going to get this infection because it's the multiple partners thing and not necessarily a protection issue or an education issue or a testing issue, like just kind of mitigating some social harms with that.
Okay.
Interesting. Yeah, no.
I have so many questions, but I feel like we need to keep moving forward.
I know, there's so much.
Question 4, I believe.
Question 4, where are we at?
Oh, and I do, when we get to HIV, I do have an HIV question from the audience. But
also, please note, everyone, that I'm winning.
2-1. That's correct.
Okay.
Okay. We have a 35-year-old male presenting to the clinic, and he tells you that 3 years ago, he had a non-painful ulcer on his penis that healed spontaneously after 6 weeks. He then presents to you today. It's now 2 months later, after his last visit with you, where nothing was going on. And now he has a fever and a targetoid rash on his torso and his extremities. And this rash is on his palms and his soles as well. That's an important point. Note how I said that separately. Today, he's reporting blurry vision, numbness in his toes, and an abnormal gait.
I got this.
His physical exam reveals pupillary constriction in size when focusing on a nearby object, but failure to constrict when exposed to a bright light. And he also has a grade 2 out of 6 systolic murmur at the right upper sternal border. Which organism is most likely responsible?
Before you even say them, I'm going to go with syphilis, but go ahead and continue.
Yeah, the options are HIV, syphilis, hepatitis B, or Haemophilus.
I still don't know what Haemophilus is, so I'm going with syphilis. Final answer.
I don't know. I think
Let's
Ethan
go, Hannah.
wins this one. What was the first
Okay.
option?
HIV.
IV.
I don't think it's that, but I'm gonna go with that just to like make it
Just to not pick what Ethan picked.
Yeah.
This is syphilis. Ethan
Okay.
got it.
Yes!
We're tied now.
2, biatch.
It's hard to put all that into one question to make it clear because
I don't know
syphilis
all
has
syphilis.
multiple stages.
And syphilis goes into a brain infection too, doesn't it? Untreated.
Yep, it's called tabes dorsalis, and that's so I demonstrated that in the question. So where you get the blurry vision, the numbness, and the gait, specifically ataxia, they have issues with their cerebellum. They can't balance and they walk funny. But the interesting thing with the eyes, like this is a manifestation of neurologic syphilis, where normally if you shine a light on your eye, your pupil should constrict. And then it should also constrict if you don't have a light, but if you just move your finger close to your face. Because that's accommodation. So it should, your eyes should focus on that. So what happens with this is called Argyll-Robinson pupil. And it is specific for syphilis. And so you will constrict when you're focusing, so you will accommodate properly. But you won't constrict with a bright light. So it looks like you're not responsive to a light reflex. But it's something, I think, with the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, but that's a whole other conversation. But this is something you get with syphilis.
Okay.
Interesting.
And syphilis is treatable, but there's
It
no
is.
vaccine for it.
No, it is treatable with penicillin G, which is an injection. So you have to get a shot of
Anything else?
penicillin.
What if you're allergic to penicillin?
I mean, I think you could probably use amoxicillin. Oh, you can't if you're allergic. Like a cephalosporin. If you're still not allergic to that, I don't know what third line. I don't know what third line would be. But I mean, if it's responsive to penicillin, I mean, it's a spirochete, which makes it a bit weird for the antibiotics because most spirochetes don't respond to penicillin, but treponema does. A spirochete just means it's a spiral shape.
Okay.
Someone in the comments just said Rochefin.
Rocephin?
Rocephin.
Yeah, Rocephin is a cephalosporin.
Oh.
Okay.
That's the brand name of one of them. I mostly deal in generics, so I don't have the generic name off the top of my head, but it's a cephalosporin.
And where do the shots go? I'm assuming they don't go into your penis.
No, it goes in your butt, probably.
Okay.
More than likely.
That's in your
Awesome.
butt.
All right. Question 5.
We're tied now.
Question 5. Oh, do you want to talk any more about syphilis?
I don't know a lot about syphilis other than I know that it causes like neurological stuff. But
yeah, so I mean, a big point with syphilis, as opposed to other things, that the ulcer is non-painful. Usually, if it's non-painful, you're thinking syphilis. If it's painful, you're thinking something else, which we'll get into later. And then, so you have primary syphilis, where you just get the ulcer. That usually goes away. And then after that, from weeks to months, you get secondary syphilis, which you're going to get the fever and the rash being on your hands and your feet matters. That is important, an important distinguishing factor. And then I mentioned the heart murmur because you can get aortitis, or an inflammation of your aorta with syphilis, and that's pretty dangerous. I mean, the whole thing's pretty dangerous. It is treatable, but it's very dangerous. So even if I were to choose between something like herpes that lasts a long time or syphilis, even though syphilis is treatable, I'd choose herpes.
Wait, seriously?
Oh yeah, no, syphilis is scary.
That's so interesting.
Syphilis is scary.
Like, so many people are like act like herpes is the worst thing, and you said like, oh yeah, it's like one of the more benign of what you know of, and I thought that was super interesting. I don't feel like a lot of people like are aware of that.
Yeah, like I don't want like nerve problems. I don't want heart problems.
Right.
Like and syphilis is one that but if you're not catching it in time, especially with the ulcer because the ulcer will go away. A lot of times people don't even know they have one. It goes away. They have secondary syphilis. They get tertiary syphilis. By tertiary, you're pretty much dead. But syphilis can be latent as well. You have periods where you don't know you have syphilis. Wow. So if you get enough replication, it could be scary and you don't even know about it. So and it's also syphilis really easily crosses the placenta. So if you are pregnant, congenital syphilis is one of the things that we test for. There's several infections. They're called the torch infections. That's a mnemonic for toxoplasmosis. Others is the O just to make it work. That's like Zika, varicella. Syphilis is included in there. Rubella, CMV, and herpes. But congenital syphilis is really scary. Can lead to liver damage, neurologic damage, all kinds of things, eye damage in babies.
Wow. How common is it?
How common is syphilis? Mm-hmm. It's fairly common. I don't have epidemiology off the top of my head, but
that's okay.
Congenital syphilis.
All right, question 5.
Question 5. I just asked that one. Okay, so this one sounds kind of similar.
Okay.
We have a 34-year-old male presenting with a painful genital ulcer. Just one ulcer, and it is painful. It appeared 1 week ago. He has several sexual partners and does not use protection. He has a 1 centimeter ulcer with a slightly necrotic base at the tip of the penis that is tender to the touch. There's also left-sided inguinal lymphadenopathy. So he has lymph nodes that are inflamed. Gram stain is obtained. So here's some info. If you were to get a swab and you grew a culture, you get gram-negative coccobacilli, which gives you a huge hint here. The most likely causative organism is... Actually, it's not as much of a hint because I changed one of the answers to make it harder.
I don't know what that means.
I know.
Klebsiella, granulomatous, Haemophilus, Ducreyi, Neisseria, gonorrhea, or syphilis.
I don't know what
I'm going to
those
say
two were.
it's not syphilis. I don't think it's gonorrhea, but I don't know enough about the other two.
I'm going to guess B just to throw a wild card in.
I'm going to guess A.
Okay. It is B.
I don't even remember what they were.
This one is Haemophilus. This is finally Haemophilus. But yeah, no, but A was fun because I didn't remember this from my first year of med school, but I apparently learned about this a long time ago. That Klebsiella is at least this type of Klebsiella is an STI. But Haemophilus, we're talking Haemophilus. This one is what you're thinking of. The ulcer looks very similar to syphilis. It looks pretty much the same, but it is painful. If you get a painful ulcer, it's probably not syphilis, and it's probably Haemophilus. And this is super, super benign. Usually it just goes away on its own. But it is an STI. And so if you do get this, you might be freaked out that you have syphilis. But this might be a really good case.
It sounds like herpes too.
Yeah, the ulcer's big. It's big compared to herpes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So this one's worth getting tested for, not only so you can differentiate it from syphilis, but because if it is Haemophilus, like, and we call this chancroid, it's pretty benign, so it'll probably go away.
Oh, okay.
We only have 9 minutes left, and I know that you wanted to talk about passing stuff
So
to
I think
babies.
we may need to go a little bit
Yes.
over if that's okay.
We can go over.
Not like
Are you
really
sure?
long,
Yeah,
but
no,
a
I'm
little
fine. I'm having fun.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
not doing anything tonight except for studying, so
Okay.
Question off topic, if you could keep it as brief as possible. Unis
Yes.
66 says, okay, not an STD, but what are the chances of a carrier of a polycystic kidney disease passing it on?
I think PKD is autosomal dominant, if I
Yeah.
remember.
I know what that means.
So if you're a carrier, if I'm correct, then you'd have, if you're a carrier, you'd have, assuming your partner's also a carrier, then they'd have a 50% chance of getting it. If your partner's not a carrier, they have about a 25% chance of getting, well, actually it would be, yeah, no, you still have a 50% if it's autosomal dominant. 50% if you're a carrier. Let me confirm that though. PKD.
I understood.
I gotta make sure
all
I'm
of that.
right. It is autosomal dominant. Yep. I was correct.
I feel like anytime we have STB on, I'm just going, I totally got that. That's fantastic, though. I love your brain.
Yeah, same.
It works sometimes.
I can't retain anything.
I
Okay.
know, man. It's so fucking difficult. I hate ADHD.
I don't know if mine's ADHD. I think I just
So
don't prioritize
how
very well.
common is this Haemophilus? Because I have never once heard of it in my life.
I think it's decently common. It's just not very well known about, probably because it's so benign and people don't really think about it. It's high yield on my boards, so it must be common enough for us to care about it so much on my tests. But
Okay. Should we move on to the next one?
yeah, here's the last question.
Okay.
And then we can just chat.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a 22-year-old female presenting with abdominal pain, dyspareunia, so that's pain with intercourse, and dysuria, so pain on urination, beginning 1 week ago that has not resolved. She also reports intermenstrual bleeding, so bleeding between periods. She has a normal abdominal exam, but she has cervical motion tenderness and adnexal tenderness. So when you're doing, when you're doing a pelvic exam, she has pain? Some tenderness. Yeah, specifically, it's cervical motion is with the cervix, and adnexal is with the ovaries.
Okay.
And scant mucopurulent cervical discharge, so just a little bit of discharge. Urinalysis is negative, and there are no organisms grown on the culture. Which of these is the most likely disease? The answers are chlamydia, hepatitis D, HPV, or gonorrhea.
All right.
I put that in there just so we could talk about it. Hepatitis D, but it's not hepatitis D.
Okay. It's not. Oh, could it be gonorrhea? Shit.
I said they were very similar.
Wait, can you say the question?
Yeah. Chlamydia.
Okay.
Hep D, HPV, gonorrhea.
I think it's chlamydia, but I thought it was vaginitis at first.
I'm gonna go with chlamydia.
You're both going with chlamydia?
Shit. That means
you're both correct. You're both correct. It's chlamydia.
Well, Hannah wins it. You beat me by 1, Hannah.
I don't know.
Yeah, so she does have vaginitis. She probably has cervicitis, which is commonly caused by chlamydia or gonorrhea. And the big thing here is chlamydia is not, you can't really grow chlamydia on like those bacterial plates that you get tested and you grow.
I was like, oh, it's vaginitis, it's vaginitis. And then you were like, nothing's showing. And I was just like, huh?
Yeah, so chlamydia often doesn't show.
Right. How did they know I had it?
All right.
That's
So
weird.
now,
So called me this is years ago, by the way.
is there
Okay, anyway.
anything else with chlamydia we need to cover?
Yeah, chlamydia is, because people in the audience are pointing out UTI. You can get some UTIs with chlamydia. You can get something called pelvic inflammatory disease with chlamydia. You can also get it with gonorrhea, basically any cervical infection. That's basically kind of chronic inflammation of the uterus, and it's really painful. People feel like they have an STI, or they feel like they might have an ovarian cyst like all the time. It's just really painful. It sucks. And chlamydia is also a very common cause of epididymitis in people who have epididymes.
What are those and what is that?
That is where sperm kind of develops after they're produced in the testes, and then they go hang out in the epididymis for a little bit before they're ready to be ejaculated. And so if you get inflammation of the epididymis, it can be very painful. And it's often caused by chlamydia in younger people. In older people, it's usually caused by E. coli. But that's something for you out there who have those organs.
So I'd like to cover something. I had a friend who had a herpes scare. So he had this person had sex with a partner, and it started burning while they're having sex, and started getting pussy, like scabby herpes looking things on the crotch area, and were convinced it was herpes. And it turns out, went to the doctor, it was just a yeast infection, which I didn't know women or people can pass yeast infections onto a person with a penis. And I found that to be incredibly fascinating. I never knew that.
Yeah, Candida can happen to anybody.
What's crazy isn't yeast infection common to like it can happen if like your immune system's like weakened, like if you have the flu or something.
Candida usually, like the big reason you'd get it in the genital region is due to pH differences in the vagina, which is why people with vaginas tend to get it more commonly. But yeah, if you're immunocompromised. But if you're immunocompromised, if you have HIV, if you have diabetes, cystic fibrosis, things like that, like it's very common to get those yeast infections. You're going to see it a lot more in those populations.
And I was informed, and I'm going to sound really stupid if I'm wrong, but yogurt can allegedly help balance a person with a vagina's pH.
You mean like yogurt on your vagina?
Yes.
I mean, yes, or you could just not.
I went ziplining in Mexico, and that's not important, but I ran into this British chick while I was ziplining in Mexico. I don't know why that's like stuck in my brain, but anyway, she's like, "Oh yes, when I had a yeast infection, I put yogurt on my lady garden." I'm sorry, that was a really bad
lady
garden. But I put yogurt on my lady garden, and I'll never forget that. And that's
you could just use some amphotericin B or some nystatin, and clear it up, and then go back to whatever it is you're doing.
Actual medicine.
Like,
but sometimes you just got.
If you really wanted to, you really wanted to. I did want to, if we had like a couple minutes, like I did want to also bring up, like, because I mentioned a couple times, hepatitis B and hepatitis D, both sexually transmitted. So hepatitis B is something that you do have to watch out for, is you can get liver failure. And when we're talking liver failure, hepatitis D is an infection that's very similar to Hep B. And in fact, you can only get it if you've had or have hepatitis B. It's very weird. It's like a hitchhiker infection almost. But it's very dangerous. Can be if you get Hep D, like not with Hep B, but if you get Hep B and then you get Hep D, it can be like life-threatening, super life-threatening.
Wow.
But when you think of your liver produces your clotting factors. So if like you might have bleeding issues if you go into liver failure, you're also going to have issues, metabolizing anything. It's not fun. So protect yourself from Hep B and Hep D. If you protect yourself from Hepatitis B, you're probably not going to get Hepatitis D. So there's a vaccine also for that. You should have already gotten them as a child. You should have had 3 or 4 of them.
Yeah, I got my Hep B vax. Now, what about hepatitis A and C?
Those ones are, Hep C could be sexually transmitted technically, but Hep A is definitely more like fecal oral route. So I guess if you're doing that kind of stuff, we more associate that with water sources for Hep A. And then Hep C, could be sexually transmitted as well.
Now, you can get hepatitis C from being like an alcoholic too, correct?
Well, you can get alcoholic liver disease, and that's going to be different than Hep C. But you're going to be susceptible.
Okay. All right. So now I think we need to talk about the big one, HIV, which brings me back to the question earlier. What are your thoughts on PrEP, and how exactly does PrEP work?
PrEP, so it's a pre-exposure prophylaxis. So essentially, you're basically taking an antiviral before it even gets to the point where you need it. HIV is pretty scary, and it is one that will actually, mess with your DNA. And the reason why it gets so scary is that it will attack white blood cells, so specifically T cells. And you need these to fight off all kinds of infections. Like, think about your latent infections. Like, think about herpes or things that, like, you shouldn't be affected by. And kind of the big one I think I want to talk about with HIV is tuberculosis. That's a huge one because you need your T cells to, like, the masses you get in your lungs from tuberculosis are because you have T cells that block off the infection and keep it there so it doesn't go anywhere else. And getting rid of your T cells would make that infection actually very problematic. You're also going to be more exposed to things like Cryptococcus, cytomegalovirus, which I talked about a little bit. That's also technically an STI, but a little bit. No, but you're not going to get problems with that unless you're immunocompromised, such as an HIV. You see a lot of how I said encephalitis is normally caused by herpes. Well, you get it from CMV in people with HIV. You also see more things like toxoplasmosis, which is a parasitic infection that you get being around cats. If you have HIV, you shouldn't be around cats because you could get brain abscesses.
Wow.
Same thing with pregnant people should also not be around cats because, or at least not handle litter boxes. You should not handle a litter box because of toxoplasmosis.
So all right, let's hypothetical. Let's say Hannah has HIV. I am on PrEP and we have sex. Can I still get HIV? Are my chances lowered? What's the deal?
Chances are a lot lower because it's not a vaccine. It's not something that's going to prevent it. You're giving yourself the treatment before you would need it. So you're just getting a head start on the treatment essentially.
So it can, if I'm understanding you correctly, not that it will, it's not guaranteed, but it's not 100% you from getting HIV.
Nothing's ever 100%. So you still need to take precautions. And when I say precautions, like, people get this awful idea that people with HIV are just going to spread it to everybody through contact or through airborne mechanisms. And that's not the case. The way you're going to get HIV or even any of these other conditions, usually you have to have some kind of trauma and some way for it to go into the bloodstream, into the mucosa. So the way you do this is with intercourse. You have a lot of friction. Usually you can get micro traumas, and that will cause an opening for these to get in. And that's how you would get HIV. So if you don't have like an open injury or something, like, and they don't have one, like their fluids have to go into your like your area of opening for it to get into your bloodstream, you're not going to get HIV. So you don't need to wear a hazmat suit around someone with HIV. You don't need to keep your distance from someone with HIV. They're people. Understand the mechanism and don't be afraid of them. Like, obviously, if you're going to be sexually active, take precautions. And you need to report things like that. But
it is my understanding that condoms are actually the most effective when it comes to HIV. Is that true? And less effective with, like, for example, herpes.
That would make sense, just due to route of transmission.
Okay.
I think you wanted to talk about toilet seats and transmission as well.
Yes, because I thought the toilet seat transmission thing was a myth, and then you kind of blew my mind and said not entirely. So what's the deal?
Well, no. I mean, you're probably not going to. But again, if you have trauma,
it's one of those theoretically
like,
things.
Yeah, well, like if you took a toilet seat, or if you like somehow like had such vigorous sex that you were like causing bleeding, and where you had like cuts on yourself, and then you sat on a toilet seat that happened to have body fluids, yeah, you could. But like it's like you'd have to have the mechanisms line up. Like, it's not just gonna happen out of nowhere.
Genitals on the toilet seat.
If you shoved a toilet seat, if you shoved an entire toilet seat up your butt that happened to have like fluid on it, okay, yeah. Theoretically, just saying, like, there are ways. If you really wanted this to happen, you could probably make it happen, but you have to try very hard.
If you have sex on a toilet, no, never mind. The sex is already happening. Never mind. I'm just trying to find
Here's
a way.
the quote you can keep from this whole episode.
You shove a toilet up your butt. That's not what you're supposed to do with it.
Is it true HIV dies when it comes into contact with oxygen?
Yeah, it does not stay viable very long. So you'd have to be very, very quick about shoving the toilet seat up your butt.
Quick!
If you're fast about it, you could still do it. But
great.
But yeah, the longer it stays out in the air, the less likely it is to be viable.
I gotta say, SDB, this has been one of my favorite shows. It's so educational and so much fun. We are already over time, but what have we not covered?
A lot.
I mean, we could do a whole separate show on vertical transmission and pregnancy related stuff.
So are you saying we should do a part 2?
I'm down to do more episodes because there's just so much to cover with all of these, and even breaking down some more of the mechanisms of how they happen. And I can have more of the epidemiology ready to go.
While I was getting ready, I was like, hey, Thomas, talk to me about STDs, so I can get in the zone for this. And he just starts rattling off all this stuff. And I'm like, okay, yeah, I know that. And then I went, wait, you had a very religious upbringing. Where did you learn this? He's like, the internet. I'm like, oh, we need to do better, world. We need to do better with this education. I mean, he was right about a lot of things, and he's in his 30s, so obviously he's not just learning shit from porn anymore, but for the most part. But anyway, yeah, I was like, okay, I learned this stuff in high school. Why weren't you taught this? So
I wasn't taught it either.
So my sex education system was poor. One of the things my sex ed teacher tried telling me was condoms were like a net. They have holes in them, and HIV was so small it would travel through the holes and it wouldn't protect. That was one of the things I learned in my sex ed class, which is demonstrably false.
No.
Yeah, I didn't learn any of this until med school. I was super sheltered.
And I was super educated.
Getting back at everybody.
You're learning out of spite.
While I have it up, I would like to thank the top tier patrons of this channel: Cindy Plaza, Left Right Left, Ryan Hammond, Kenneth Leonard, Skye, Secular Rarity, Philip Leitch, Richard Gilliver, _Atheism, Ameet Mathew, Ray Sylvester, and Gerudo San. Thank you so much for your patronage.
I'm glad you were here, and I hope someone learned something.
I hope so, because I feel like I just talked. So I hope it was.
I loved it. I learned so much. It was extremely educational, and we had fun with it.
I think I'm pretty learned on these things. I did learn something new. And people need to talk about it. You're not going to die. Just like treat your symptoms. Don't be scared of them. Talk to your partners about what's going on with you. Be responsible. Wrap your willy. And
yeah.
Stick a toilet up your ass.
SDB, do you have anything coming up?
Trivia tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern time on Twitch. It is random topics of trivia, so all types of things. So it's not all science. I put lots of stuff in there.
Okay, I'll go.
Even people who like sports, or people who like music, or people who like other stuff. We got questions.
I don't like sports.
So come hang out there. And then Saturday, 2 p.m. Eastern on my YouTube, I'm going to rant for an hour and a half on adrenal fatigue and why it's bullshit. So come watch that.
That is. So
I would actually like to listen to that, because I've heard a little bit about adrenal fatigue. So next Thursday, Hannah, we will have Rudy B on, and we will be discussing relationships and gender constructs.
Hell yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, and then hopefully the week after, I got to reach out to Ameet. Hopefully we can have Ameet on.
I hope so. This
coming Tuesday on The Perspective will be Dave Warnock and Kenneth Leonard for the season finale of The Perspective. That's all I got. SDB, as always, thanks for doing this. Hannah, love doing these shows with you. Good night, everyone.
See you next week. Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.